Coming up on AVANT Technology Insights with Ken Presti. We're here to talk about proof of concept testing that enterprise decision makers should do as part of the evaluation process in advance of buying something major, in this case, UCaaS. Basically, this involves at least a temporary install plus a group of internal folks who will use the product on a trial basis and then provide feedback to management, which will be considered in the go, no-go decision. Welcome to AVANT Technology Insights. I'm your host, Ken Presti, Research Vice President of AVANT Research and Analytics. The link between solving business challenges and cutting-edge technologies has become tighter and more complex than ever before. In this podcast series from AVANT Research and Analytics, we help enterprise decision makers sort through the business case, the value, the challenges, and ultimately the bottom line of technology adoption. So listen to us at your desktop, take us in the car, tune in from the commuter train, or download us at the gate. You'll find us on Apple, Spotify, and Google, as well as at www.goavant.net/podcast. My guest today is a senior cloud sales engineer here at AVANT Communications. Having been involved in countless opportunities brought by AVANT's trusted advisors, he's no stranger to the merits of a proof of concept, otherwise known as a POC. I've asked him to walk us through his views on how to set up and administer a successful one. I want to welcome to the program, John Paullin. John Paullin, welcome to the show. Glad you could be here today. Our subject is proof of concepts, otherwise known as POCs, which have become a very important part of the sales and purchasing process. Understand you've got some experience in helping companies to do this. Give me a little bit of color as to what your role has been.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on this, Ken. Long-time listener, first-time participant in this exercise. So,
thank you very much.
Very excited here. But so as a sales engineer here at AVANT, we ourselves are not ones that commence a POC in the sense of boots in the ground on a regular basis. That is something that the suppliers would go through. That said, my role up to this point has been primarily in an advisory capacity, helping the customers understand why you would want to look into a POC, what is the proper way of going about a POC from an agnostic standpoint, who to involve, getting a sense of what success criteria would be. But going into any POC, there's a fair amount of discovery needs to be done up front to understand, what are we really solving for? What are the business challenges we're trying to overcome? And that is something that I am doing daily and can help, facilitate that to get us towards what are those success criteria for a POC.
Let's start at the beginning. Kind of walk me through the basic process in terms of how do you know if the purchase you are considering actually deserves a POC? I mean, not everything that you buy would require that, but for some of them higher ticket and higher commitment items, I imagine, this would be a good thing to do to be able to get a sense of what the variations are between the different candidates. How do you recommend that customers evaluate that?
Well, it's a good question. I'd pose a question back to any company that is considering UCaaS and wondering about, do I do a POC? The question is, are you comfortable paying for a solution for typically a 3-year period and paying them many thousands of dollars every month for a solution you've never tested? So if the answer to that question is no, I'm not comfortable doing it, then a POC is an absolute must in any kind of UCaaS or CCaaS sale opportunity. And really, you're doing a POC fundamentally because you're either torn between 2 or maybe 3 platforms that you are seriously entertaining, or you're doing it to validate a decision that's already been made. So that's the basis behind a POC. Right. That said, you're generally not going to POC every single vendor that has come through the door. There's been some stuff done earlier in the sales cycle to, thin the herd, so to speak. And for that reason, that's why a POC is usually commenced mid-sales cycle or towards the end of a sales cycle, after there's been a thorough discovery process up front, again, where Avant really lends its assistance, uh, in the most obvious fashion.
Hmm.
And then there's usually a product demonstration or product demonstrations given to various stakeholders to ensure that it's going to meet their needs, at least as they see it. And so again, that narrows down the playing field quite substantially. But seeing a product in a demo environment doesn't tell you how it's going to operate in your environment,
Hmm.
nor is that going to tell you, will end users actually adopt it? So that is why you need to really try it before you buy it. But it goes back to that first question. Are you comfortable paying for a solution you haven't tested?
Right. So, John, I get the sense that this is kind of one of those iceberg things where the part of the POC that's most visible is only a fraction of what actually goes on, and a lot of it is beneath the surface. In other words, I'm thinking there's a huge planning aspect of this in order to map it out, get it right, get the right players in place, both in terms of the vendors and service providers on the one side and the people internal who are going to be working with it on the other. What goes into planning the POC? What are the things that you do before you actually start testing the system itself?
It's a great question. The basis of it is, again, what are we trying to solve for? So we need to have a well-defined future state because that's going to drive us towards identifying those success criteria to get us to that desired future state. So again, in other words, what are the business challenges we're trying to solve with a new phone system or contact center for that matter that have to be demonstrated in the POC?
Hmm.
And so
And this, of course, I got to say, this, of course, relates not just to phone systems, but basically anything that you would buy from any technology, right?
precisely, yeah.
Right.
In the context of what I'm referring to here today, this is going to be
Hmm.
predominantly UCAS focused.
Okay.
But yeah, to your point though, any kind of technology that is going to be adopted by a company, you need to understand, why am I looking at that technology? What am I trying to mitigate, or what gaps in my workflow,
Hmm.
whatever the case may be, am I trying to solve for?
Right.
So part of identifying that future state comes from, again, some upfront discovery, but also this is where creating surveys to, prior to a POC, to help you document to senior leadership, here's what, the grunts in the trenches, if you will,
Hmm.
are saying. This is how they're using the current phone system, and here's some of the feedback and the issues that they're having with it. So that's critical to capture up front because, all right, now we know where there are challenges. We may know from a senior leadership perspective what the big picture is, but what is the average user down in the trenches doing? IT may not even know that. Uh, what HR is doing on a daily basis, especially the
Hmm.
larger the organization. So having a survey to capture that will be tremendously helpful in formulating what those success criteria will be.
So to your point, I'm guessing that you've got to be pretty careful, or at least methodical, I guess is a better term, in terms of figuring out who should be on your internal test team, because you've got the IT people who are looking at it from one perspective. You've got different types of users who are looking at it from any variety of other perspectives. How do you decide who should be on that test team? And how large should that team be?
It's a great question. So the average end user that just needs a phone number and a voicemail, doesn't have anything complex, uh, they're they tend not to be a very good candidate for a POC. To them, a phone is a phone is a phone. If it works, great. If it doesn't, find me one that does. So not a lot of value to glean from them. But the folks that should be included in the POC are those personnel across different departments who are known to be vocal in the organization. Not vocal to the extent of being a nuisance, but vocal, give their opinions, and are respected for their opinions.
Mhm.
Because there needs to be a business case, behind this as well, brought to senior leadership that says, here is how the solution is going to address XYZ. Here's what the ROI may be, and so forth. But also, Jane down in human resources or Debbie in sales, this is what this is their opinion of the current setup and why we need to look at a future solution, and having them as part of the POC
Mhm.
adds a lot more credibility to it.
And you raise a good point because, on the one hand, you want people who are knowledgeable, but you also need to have people who are going to give you their honest truth, as opposed to people out there who may say, I believe my management wants to go this route, so I'm just going to kind of try to rubber stamp that opinion. When doing that would be counterintuitive to the entire purpose of the POC to begin with.
Yeah. Again, if management has certain agendas or preconceived notions that the cheapest solution will suit our needs, I mean, that's where a pre-survey and certainly a post-POC survey will either validate that decision that, all right,
Mhm.
we really did need just the cheapest solution. It is checking all the boxes, or it confirms that you get what you pay for, and based on the feedback of our most influential employees, it's not going to be adopted. So it's not money well spent in that
Mhm.
case.
How do you establish the guidelines, the rules, and the success parameters of all this? Because at the end of the day, you need something that's reasonably actionable and, at least to some extent, kind of empirical.
Hmm.
How do you set this up in a way that is fair across the board to the different service providers and vendors involved, and gives you something that is pretty much actionable? Something you can act on.
And that's, I think you raise a good point there. This really needs to be done fairly, not only for the service provider, but also for yourself as an organization. Skewing one POC slightly because of some biases, doesn't give you an objective comparison of two different platforms or however many you're looking at. Uh, so going back to the original question though about what are the guidelines, parameters, and such forth. Uh, in the POCs that I've seen and have been involved in, it's a mix of some kind of pass-fail criteria. For instance, you may be evaluating a service provider on, I have as a customer a certain uptime SLA requirement, and in looking at the T's and C's of the supplier, you either pass that, you either have that or you don't. It must be a multi-tenant solution. You have that or you don't. So some of those are discussion-based topics,
Mhm.
but the empirical is where you're going with this. That's where uh, you need to look at what are some of the functional needs of the end users, and this can be done. You need to look at what are those functional needs internally and externally. So looking at, does this solution does it have call recording? Yes or no?
Mhm.
What is the feedback about that? What does it have a screen sharing solution? Yes or no? What is the feedback? Do the end users like the way that the screen sharing is facilitated in that platform? So it goes back to not only are they checking the boxes on paper, but when the end users are put to the test, is it passing the test by having the things that the end users have identified through discovery work up front that they need.
The whole thought of doing a proof of concept is that you're going to basically road test a couple of different solutions. Do you do this concurrently or consecutively? In other words, do you do this in a situation where you're going to test one and then tear it down and put in another? Or do you try to do a situation where you've got multiple POCs going at the same time, which on the one hand could be more complicated, but actually might even be more fair because you'd be applying the same standards to all of those participants?
Yeah, so it definitely the latter. You want to be testing with the same group with the same rules to get a fair evaluation comparison.
So
Uh,
everybody's going to be performing in multiple POCs at the same time then, right?
that would be the idea. It also
Okay.
saves time and can eliminate POC fatigue. Think if we're
Right.
doing a POC for this next 2 weeks and then followed by another POC, different platform 2 weeks later. You got to remember that the people in those POCs, they have jobs, so
Mhm.
they've got things to do, and they're not simply there just to be test subjects. So trying to accomplish it with the same group of users that can give you their honest feedback. I liked the way that this platform helped me perform my job better than that platform under the same conditions will give you the most objective means of comparing those two.
So, do you find that some of the service providers and vendors are more willing to, participate in a POC than others? I mean, obviously, they'd rather just have you go and buy their stuff.
Yeah.
But when they see that that's not going to happen, what is their reactions typically, and what is their level of commitment to helping that POC take place?
So it depends on the technology. So
Mhm.
staying within my little sphere of cloud telephony and cloud contact center, selfishly, in the UCaaS world, a POC is really an expected part of the process because you can spin up test environments that have the feature sets that a customer is looking for, to test. But when it comes to contact center, in contrast, those tend to be more of like a day-long demo because it goes back to the complexity involved in the POC. If a supplier, a larger opportunity, if as part of the POC, they want to see how this solution is going to integrate and work within a key line of business application. A smaller shop, if they have their requirement, a vendor will entertain that. There are costs to some of these depending on the level of complexity. But sticking on the CCAS for just a moment, the reason why those are usually day-long demos of a test solution is that it's hard to show how it's going to work in your environment because the contact center is so dependent on things like a CRM that to spend the time up front and build that integration, usually it's going to be reserved for the ones that are worth it. Well, I shouldn't say that, but like the larger, more lucrative deals is where that kind of stuff happens. But certainly in the UCaaS space, a POC is an expected part of the process. How long and how complex it may go is subject to negotiation. But that's where if a vendor is asked to do X, Y, Z as part of that process, then they may pump the brakes a little bit and say, do we really need to test that? Again, it's kind of subject to negotiation.
You mentioned costs a moment ago. What do you usually see there? How are those costs recouped, and what do they, I don't know that we can get into dollar amounts because I'm sure that's very much variable,
Mm-hmm.
but what are the situations under which they're most likely to assess a fee for participating in a POC?
So in the UCaaS space, generally there is not a charge for a POC. But again, it goes to the complexity and the length of the POC. So if part of the success criteria that's identified is we need to see how UCaaS supplier XYZ integrates with this line of business application, and it's going to take pro services to facilitate that, then there will be a cost to the POC. Now, the way that it's structured, I can't give you dollars and cents, as you mentioned, just because of the variability of suppliers and umpteen other things.
But I get that.
But the way I've seen these structured is, okay, if we're going to be spending a lot of upfront work to tailor make this POC and hook it into your app, your environment, then if that success criteria that we've mutually agreed upon is met, then this rolls into a contract. Now, the money you've spent up front for the POC, in a sense, is, I've seen it worded so it's like, you've given us money, we're not going to ask you now for months 1, 2, and 3, or however much the POC costs in addition to the POC. It's basically you've prepaid for that solution.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that would be. Yeah, that makes sense. And how long should these things run?
So I've seen them run anywhere between a couple days to 30 days, but again, it goes back to the complexity and the size of the customer. Shorter POCs are going to be preferred because, again, let's be frank, we're all busy, and end users are not going to be testing this solution diligently on the supplier's behalf. They've got day jobs. So usually the first day of a POC is where A supplier's sales engineer is going to come on site. They're going to bring donuts and ask the group to the POC group to come in with their laptops, install the software, and go through a kind of a training that we're going to have you do this, then we're going to have you do that, and if you're struggling, I'm here on site to show you how to do it. But usually after that first day, those folks go back to their daily lives. So it's important for a supplier and a trusted advisor to ensure that they are staying engaged with that test group to make sure that they don't just kind of set it, forget it. And you can take advantage of running usage reports to see who is and who is not using the solution, and send those results to customers IT and ask them to get involved as well to help promote, hey, we need to keep using this in various different capacities. So the shorter the better. If we can get that criteria, that success criteria tested in a few days, great. If it does need to be longer, 30 days, 60 days maybe at the high end there. But again, it goes back to POC fatigue. And there's also potential for paralysis by analysis of testing too much. And the last thing I'll add is, when you're anybody that's listening to this as a customer, you need to do your due diligence to test as many things as possible, but you're not going to be able to test every single scenario under the sun. Things will get overlooked, and that's why it's important to keep in mind that as your business evolves and as your needs change, that selected vendor or that vendor you're considering, you need to have a sense of confidence that they're able to grow with you and that they will have a platform that down the line is able to address business needs you may not presently have.
John, are there any magic bullets to be considered once the POC is over and you've done multiple POCs now and you're ready to make a choice? Any magic bullets around how to go about making that choice from an operational standpoint? Any process aspect that you should go through in order to preserve that level playing field that we've been talking about?
Well, it goes back to the pre and the post call survey or pre and post POC survey results. One thing that I failed to mention before is that it's in the best interest of any supplier and trusted advisor to recommend this, that there be some sort of like a champions book or deck put together. And a champion within any company customer is going to be the one that is your internal advocate. So you need to help arm that individual with information that includes, again, those results. Here's what this present state was. Here's what the post result or post POC results are. See how things have improved. Here's some key quotes from some key individuals that are respected within the organization who are known to give impartial feedback, and also some degree of financial information in there that these are our current costs, and this is what up to this point, this is what the POC or the POC'd solution would cost us, because you need to build a business case for senior leadership. So those would be some best practices throughout that. Does that answer the question, or am I off the mark a little bit?
No, that sounds great. As a matter of fact, I think you rounded it out just awesomely through the course of this podcast. Great roundup of information in terms of how to plan the POC, how to put the team together, what you need to do on the front end, what you need to do in the middle of it, and what you need to do on the back end. So this has been very helpful, and I think our listeners are going to be very happy with the feedback that you've given them. John Paullin, Senior Cloud Sales Engineer for AVANT Communications. I want to thank you very much for being our guest today. Great comments and great feedback and great advice, my friend. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and looking forward to hopefully being a part of many more of these.
Excellent. We'll look forward to that as well. You've been listening to AVANT Technology Insights, featuring information and opinions on how key technologies can be leveraged to solve business problems. AVANT Technology Insights is a service of AVANT Communications, a platform for IT decision-making. All opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host. For more information, please feel free to download our research reports and other resources at www.goavant.net. That's www.goavant, as in victory, ant.net. For Avant Research and Analytics, this is Ken Presti.